Hi, I'm John. Welcome to the channel. Today's a record review, and it's kind of a fun one for me. It's two records representing two fairly different periods in one of my favorite musicians' careers, and that is John Coltrane. And it gave me an excuse to listen to bits and pieces of a great many of his albums, and then listen to two albums all the way through, front to back. And that's a great pleasure because these are two truly fantastic albums. They are obviously both John Coltrane. They are Giant Steps and A Love Supreme. Giant Steps is the older of the two records. It was recorded at the end of the 50s or 1960. I guess it came out in 1960. And it represents John Coltrane's first period. And this period is bebop, hard bop, post bop. It's the cutting edge avant-garde jazz of the 50s. And these are a lot of very recognizable tunes. All the songs on here are Coltrane originals. And it includes one of my all-time very favorite songs from any genre. It's one of the most beautiful songs ever written, Naima. And it also has the title track on here is one of the most insane chord progressions in all of music. Quite a few years ago, I had a friend of mine worked here with me at the factory. And she was a very accomplished musician and composer. And one day we had the radio on, and the song Giant Steps came on. And I, of course, as a huge John Coltrane fan, I recognized it instantly, and I started whistling along. And by the time I had whistled my way to the end of Giant Steps' initial melodic phrase, she was staring at me with her mouth open, and I was like, "What?" And she said, "How did you whistle along with that?" And I said, "Well, that's a really famous song. I know that song really well, and I love that song." And she just shook her head, and she was like, "To me, it sounded like random notes, one after another, after another, after another, with no rhyme or reason to it." And it's just an interesting take in that even someone who is a lifelong musician, if they're not introduced to certain modes or types of music, then why wouldn't it just be a whole bunch of noise? Why wouldn't it just be Greek? And it's funny because to me, Giant Steps, the song, is a totally hummable melody and is very catchy and recognizable. But yeah, it's a pretty crazy set of chords. And in fact, on listening to it again just now before this video, I realized that maybe they recorded this before they practiced it enough. You can sort of hear, or at least in my impression of it, you can hear in Coltrane's initial opening of his solo. He takes a nice long solo in this. The first several bars, he's a little bit hesitant, not really his usual assured, utterly virtuistic self. And in fact, in my opinion, Tommy Flanagan, the pianist on this session, was absolutely not ready, and his solo follows Coltrane's, and I'm pretty sure that he has no fucking idea what to do through the entire solo. And then about 2/3 of the way through, he brings it up to these much bigger, slower chords that sort of arch over a few bars at a time, essentially making it very pretty, but essentially kind of giving up, I think. I'll bet it could have been a lot better if they had played it another dozen times, maybe. But that's just my impression. It is all these songs on this are fantastic songs, absolutely representative of a high point of hard bop, and just a killer record. Among a great many killer Coltrane records from this time: Blue Train, Lush Life, self-titled Coltrane, My Favorite Things. There's a lot of fantastic records from this time. That record was on Atlantic. After Atlantic, he switched over to Impulse, and a couple of albums in with that record label, Coltrane changed. He changed his musical output. And he went from these light speed flurries of notes that some people were calling sheets of sound. And these sheets of sound, Coltrane would describe them essentially as he had all these ideas in his head where he had these chords and notes that needed to be put together, and they didn't always necessarily fit in eighth or quarter or 16th or even 32nds or triplets, and that he had to essentially invent these hybrid time signatures in order to get all of these notes to fit into the amounts of time that he thought would be appropriate. So he was zipping back and forth between 5 and 6 and 9 and 4 time in order to fit all these notes in. And the end result is this flurry of notes, virtuistic speed, and this harmonic structure that kind of comes alive on a level that you're maybe not necessarily aware of at first. And it is utterly astounding. Really brilliant playing. As you get into the later phase of Coltrane's output, represented, in my opinion, my favorite with this album, A Love Supreme, suddenly he's writing compositions that don't have these complex chord progressions, and they don't have this linear unrolling of melody and time. He essentially steamrolls all of that. He burnishes it flat into these far more minimalist underpinnings where there's really only a slow and relatively simple chordal loop that kind of repeats and almost like a chant, over which then he will solo in this similar virtuistic style, but liberated from trying to follow a complex chord progression. And in this sense, all of the complexity remains, and yet it's becomes untethered from the dock, and he's able to sort of sail this giant open sea of improvisation and freedom. And in my opinion, this record is a great introduction into that part of Coltrane's career. This album is actually, it's one song broken up into 4 different parts, essentially movements. And it's utterly gorgeous. The melodies are beautiful, yet it doesn't break into as much freedom as many of his later records do. But many of the later records from this period follow this mold, and some of them will go even farther out, but they all have this slow reverence and exploration of what it means to be a spiritual person. And he essentially has if not invented, he has sort of perfected what came to be known as spiritual jazz with this record. A Love Supreme is referring to his love and quest for knowing God in this one. Coltrane, from the 50s on, in the 50s, Coltrane was quite addicted to heroin. And so as he was able to shake that habit, he went on quite a spiritual journey and was a voracious reader of different texts, Hindu and Buddhism, Islamic texts. He read the Quran, he read the Bible, he got into Kabbalism. He developed his musical mind in a way that could very easily be described as religious. And he would notate music in a way that became almost like a mandala, or you could see that it became a spiritual practice to him. And if you can sort of follow these sort of spirals and circular diagrams of repetitions of patterns and things like that, that were the way that he would notate music and the way that he felt like music was better expressed than our usual little five-line staff. Really beautiful stuff. Fantastic stuff, and lots of other ones to explore beyond this one. Meditations, Sonship, Om, not to mention in both of these periods of his career, tons and tons of live material and things like that. Coltrane is just a killer spiritual creature. He was sainted, Saint John Coltrane, sometime in the 70s or 80s, I think. And rightfully so. I think his explorations into religion and the meaning of religion and the relationship between religion and humanity and music is incredibly important. And anyone who's interested in any of those things, humanity, music, or religion, needs to check out John Coltrane, especially in his later period. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.